Emma's eyes never left Tyler's face, but her peripheral vision tracked every movement Jake and Brad made. She could read their intentions in their body language, see the exact moment they would commit to an attack, predict their angles of approach. With mathematical precision, Master Chen had drilled these scenarios into her muscle memory until her responses became as automatic as breathing. "You have one chance to walk away," she said calmly, her voice carrying an odd quality that made several students in the crowd take unconscious steps backward. Tyler's confusion was rapidly transforming into rage. Girls didn't talk to him this way. Girls certainly didn't grab his wrist and issue ultimatums in front of half the school. His reputation depended on maintaining dominance in moments like these, and every second that passed with Emma's fingers wrapped around his arm was a second of power slipping away from him. "Jake, Brad, grab her!" he snarled, his voice rising to a pitch that bordered on hysteria. The two boys lunged forward simultaneously, exactly as Emma had anticipated they would. Jake reached for her shoulders while Brad went for her waist, their coordination impressive but utterly predictable to someone who had spent countless hours studying group attack patterns. Emma released Tyler's wrist and flowed between their grasping hands like water, her body moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. Jake's momentum carried him forward into the space where she had been standing, causing him to stumble awkwardly as his hands closed on empty air. Brad fared even worse. As Emma slipped away from his grab, she pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow backward into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The strike was short and controlled, designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. But the effect was immediate and devastating. Brad's diaphragm spasmed, his lungs suddenly unable to process oxygen, and he doubled over, gasping like a fish thrown onto dry land. The confident sneer melted off his face, replaced by panic and confusion as his body betrayed him. Jake spun around, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger, and charged at Emma again with his fists raised. This time she didn't evade. Instead, she stepped into his attack, catching his right wrist with her left hand while simultaneously driving the heel of her right palm into his sternum. The impact was precise and devastating, transferring enough force through his chest cavity to disrupt his nervous system without breaking any bones. Jake's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the hallway floor like a marionette with severed strings. The entire confrontation had taken less than 10 seconds, but to the students watching in stunned silence, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl. Their world had been turned upside down by the sight of quiet, unremarkable Emma Rodriguez, dismantling Tyler's crew with movements so smooth and efficient they looked almost choreographed. Phones that had been raised to record what they assumed would be another humiliating viral video were now capturing something entirely different. Tyler stared at his fallen friends in disbelief, his brain struggling to process what his eyes were telling him. Jake was conscious, but curled into a fetal position, clutching his chest and making small whimpering sounds. Brad was still on his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come, tears streaming down his face as he fought against the sensation of drowning on dry land. These were the same boys who had helped him terrorize underclassmen for 3 years, who had never lost a fight or backed down from a confrontation. Now they lay broken at the feet of a girl who looked like she should be reading poetry in a library corner. Emma turned her attention back to Tyler, her dark eyes holding depths that he was only now beginning to recognize. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction at having defeated his friends, just a quiet competence that was somehow more terrifying than any rage would have been. "Your turn," she said simply, her voice carrying the same calm tone she might use to ask about homework assignments. For the first time in his life, Tyler Matthews felt genuine fear. Not the exciting kind of fear that came from riding roller coasters or watching horror movies, but the deep, primal terror of prey recognizing a predator. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this girl as possible, but his pride and the watching crowd held him in place like invisible chains. He was the quarterback, the king of Westfield High, the untouchable golden boy whose father owned half the businesses in town. He couldn't be seen running from some nobody transfer student. "You think you're tough?" Tyler asked, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to summon his usual bravado. "You think beating up my friends makes you some kind of badass?" He raised his own fists, mimicking fighting stances he had seen in movies, completely unaware of how amateur and clumsy his form appeared to someone with Emma's training. Emma studied his posture with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. She could see at least a dozen openings in his defense, multiple ways to end the confrontation with minimal effort. Tyler's hands were too low, his feet positioned wrong, his weight distributed poorly. He telegraphed his intentions with every breath, every muscle twitch, every micro-expression that flickered across his face. Against an opponent like this, Emma could have ended the fight before it began. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the memory of her mother's exhausted face, pleading for a normal life free from violence and complications. Perhaps it was the knowledge that seriously injuring Tyler would bring down consequences that would destroy their carefully constructed new beginning in Cedar Falls. Or perhaps it was simple mercy, the recognition that Tyler Matthews was not truly evil, just a spoiled child who had never learned the difference between strength and cruelty. "I don't want to fight you," Emma said quietly, taking a small step backward. "Just leave me alone, and we can pretend this never happened." It was an offer of peace, a chance for Tyler to preserve some dignity while extricating himself from a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. But Tyler's ego was too fragile to accept such mercy. In his mind, backing down now would mean social suicide, the permanent loss of everything that defined his identity at Westfield High. He swung at Emma's face with all the force his quarterback training had given him, putting his full body weight behind a haymaker that could have broken her nose or knocked her unconscious if it had connected. Emma simply wasn't there when his fist arrived. Emma's movement was so subtle that several students in the crowd missed it entirely. One moment, Tyler's fist was racing toward her face with enough force to shatter bone, and the next, it was cutting harmlessly through empty air, while Emma stood 3 inches to the left, completely relaxed and apparently unbothered by the near miss. Tyler's momentum carried him forward, his overextended punch throwing him off balance as he stumbled past her into the lockers with a metallic crash that echoed through the hallway. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the watching students. Conversations resumed in hushed whispers as phones continued recording, capturing every angle of Tyler's humiliation for posterity. Emma could hear fragments of amazed commentary drifting through the crowd. "Did you see how fast she moved?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tyler Matthews grabbed the hem of Emma's plaid skirt with a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Let's see what the new girl's hiding under here," he sneered, his fingers already tugging upward as his friends Jake and Brad circled closer, blocking any escape route. Emma's dark eyes flashed with something that made the crowded hallway fall silent, a dangerous calm that none of them recognized. "You have exactly 3 seconds to let go," she whispered, her voice steady as steel. Tyler laughed, completely oblivious that in moments he'd be on the floor, and the entire school would witness something that would shatter everything they thought they knew about the quiet transfer student from Portland. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning mist clung to the pine trees surrounding Westfield High School in Cedar Falls, Oregon, when 17-year-old Emma Rodriguez pushed through the heavy glass doors for what she hoped would be just another unremarkable day. 3. Weeks had passed since her mother Maria had moved them to this small town of 15,000, trading the anonymity of Portland for the suffocating familiarity of a place where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business before lunch period ended. Emma kept her head down as she navigated the crowded hallways, her long black hair falling like a curtain around her face, hiding the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. She had perfected the art of invisibility over the years, moving through different schools like a ghost. Her mother's nursing career had taken them from city to city, hospital to hospital, always chasing better opportunities or escaping situations that had grown too complicated. This time, Maria had promised it would be different. Cedar Falls General Hospital had offered her a permanent position on the night shift, decent pay, and the stability they both craved. Emma had agreed to give small-town life a chance, though everything in her gut warned against trusting the promise of a fresh start. What none of her new classmates at Westfield High could possibly imagine was that beneath Emma's carefully crafted facade of ordinariness lay years of intensive training in Krav Maga and kickboxing. The journey had begun when she was 13, after a particularly brutal incident at a school in Sacramento, where older students had cornered her in an empty bathroom, leaving her with bruises that took weeks to heal and emotional scars that ran much deeper. Maria had found her daughter crying in the shower that night, trying to scrub away the shame and helplessness that clung to her skin like smoke. The next day, they had walked into Master Chen's Self-Defense Academy, where Emma spent the following 4 years, transforming her fear into something far more powerful. Under Master Chen's patient guidance, she learned not just the physical techniques of combat, but the mental discipline required to control her emotions and channel her energy. With surgical precision, her small frame became deceptively strong, her reflexes lightning quick, and her ability to read body language and anticipate attacks bordered on supernatural. By the time they left Portland, Emma could take down opponents twice her size without breaking a sweat. But Maria had made her promise to keep those skills hidden in Cedar Falls. "I want you to have a normal teenage experience, Mija," her mother had pleaded during their last night in Portland, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. "No more fighting, no more trouble. Just be a regular girl who worries about homework and boys and what to wear to prom." Emma had reluctantly agreed, understanding her mother's desperate need for peace after years of defending her daughter's actions to principals, parents, and occasionally police officers who didn't understand the difference between necessary self-defense and unprovoked violence. So Emma buried her true nature beneath layers of baggy sweaters and silence, speaking only when directly addressed by teachers and spending lunch periods alone with her nose buried in textbooks. She chose a seat in the back corner of every classroom, wore earbuds during passing periods to discourage conversation, and had managed to make it through nearly a month at Westfield without drawing any significant attention to herself. The strategy seemed to be working perfectly until Tyler Matthews decided she looked like easy prey. Tyler was everything Emma had learned to recognize and avoid in her years of moving from school to school. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never having faced real consequences for his actions, he carried himself like someone who had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with his father's money or his own intimidation tactics. As the star quarterback for the Westfield Eagles, he enjoyed a level of social immunity that made him virtually untouchable within the school's rigid hierarchy. Teachers looked the other way when he disrupted classes. Administrators dismissed complaints about his behavior as boys being boys. And his father's ownership of the largest car dealership in Cedar Falls ensured that any serious consequences would mysteriously disappear behind closed doors. Emma had been observing Tyler and his crew for weeks, noting their patterns and identifying their preferred targets. They seemed to favor younger students, kids from families without money or connections, anyone who looked different or didn't fit into Westfield's narrow definition of acceptable. Jake Wilson and Brad Chen served as Tyler's enforcers, always, ready to back up their leader's cruelest impulses with their own brand of creative harassment. Together, they had created an atmosphere of fear that permeated the school like toxic fog, making even the bravest students think twice before standing up for themselves or others. Emma had managed to stay off their radar by maintaining her carefully constructed invisibility, but she should have known that in a school as small as Westfield, eventually everyone became a target. The morning everything changed started like any other, with Emma hurrying through the main hallway near the science wing, hoping to reach her first period chemistry class without incident. She was almost at the classroom door when she felt someone grab her backpack, jerking her to a sudden, "Stop that," sent her books tumbling to the floor. Well, what do we have here?" Tyler's voice carried the kind of lazy menace that comes from years of unchallenged power. The mysterious new girl who thinks she's too good to talk to anyone. Emma turned slowly, already calculating distances and angles, noting the positions of Tyler's friends and the growing crowd of students who had stopped to watch the entertainment. This was the moment she had been dreading since her first day at Westfield. The inevitable confrontation that would force her to choose between maintaining her promise to her mother and protecting herself from humiliation. Jake and Brad moved to flank her, blocking any potential escape routes with practiced efficiency. Their movements were coordinated, suggesting they had done this many times before to other students who had dared to exist outside Tyler's sphere of approval. Emma could see the excitement in their eyes, the anticipation of witnessing another victim's breakdown. Around them, other students pulled out their phones, ready to capture whatever was about to happen for social media posterity. That's when Tyler made his fatal mistake, reaching for the hem of her skirt with absolute confidence that she would do nothing to stop him. Emma's hand moved faster than Tyler's brain could process, clamping down on his wrist with a grip that felt like a steel trap snapping shut. The confident smirk on his face flickered for just a moment as he tried to pull away, only to discover that her fingers had locked around his bones with impossible strength. "I said let go," Emma repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, but every student in the hallway heard it clearly. The casual chatter and locker slamming had stopped completely, replaced by an electric tension that made the air itself feel charged. Tyler's first instinct was to laugh it off, to maintain his reputation in front of the growing audience. "What are you gonna do about it, Portland?" he sneered, using the nickname his crew had given her after learning where she'd transferred from. "Cry to your mommy?" But when he tried to yank his hand free again, Emma's grip tightened, just enough to send a sharp warning through his nervous system. For the first time in his 17 years of existence, Tyler Matthews encountered resistance that he couldn't simply bulldoze through with size and aggression. Jake Wilson stepped forward, his meaty hands already curling into fists. "Let him go, freak," he growled, moving closer to Emma's left side. Brad Chen mirrored the movement on her right, the two of them forming what they thought was an intimidating pincer formation. They had used this tactic countless times before, overwhelming their targets with superior numbers and the threat of violence. What they failed to understand was that Emma had spent 4 years training specifically for situations exactly like this one. And where did she learn to do that? Tyler's never been embarrassed like this before. The whispers carried a mixture of awe and excitement, the electric thrill that comes from witnessing the impossible. Tyler pushed himself away from the lockers, his face flushed crimson with embarrassment and fury. A small cut on his forehead where he had struck the metal was already beginning to swell, adding physical injury to the psychological wounds that Emma's evasion had inflicted. He had thrown everything he had into that punch, the same kind of devastating blow that had flattened opponents on the football field and settled disputes in locker rooms. The fact that it had connected with nothing but air felt like a fundamental violation of the natural order. "Lucky dodge," Tyler snarled, wiping blood from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Let's see you do that again." He adopted what he imagined was a more professional fighting stance, having watched enough mixed martial arts videos to believe he understood the basics of combat. His feet were wider apart now, his hands held higher, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash devastating force. What he failed to realize was that his new posture actually created more vulnerabilities than it protected, offering Emma even more targets than his original amateur stance. Emma remained perfectly still, her hands hanging loosely at her sides, her breathing slow and controlled. To the untrained eye, she appeared defenseless, even vulnerable. But Master Chen had taught her that true readiness often looked like relaxation. Tension was the enemy of speed, rigidity the destroyer of fluid. Movement. She watched Tyler's eyes, reading his intentions like words on a page, noting the subtle shifts in his weight that would telegraph his next attack seconds before he committed to it. Jake Wilson was finally struggling to his feet, one hand pressed against his chest, where Emma's palm strike had disrupted his breathing. His face was pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on terror. He had been in dozens of fights throughout his high school career, had dished out punishment and received his share in return, but he had never experienced anything like the clinical precision of Emma's counterattack. There had been no wild swinging, no grappling, no extended exchange of blows. One moment he had been charging forward with complete confidence, and the next he was on the ground questioning everything he thought he knew about physical confrontation. Brad was in even worse condition, still on his knees and struggling to draw full breaths. The strike to his solar plexus had been perfectly calculated to incapacitate without causing lasting damage, but the psychological effect was devastating. Like Jake, he had built his identity around physical dominance, using his size and strength to intimidate smaller students into submission. The realization that all of his advantages could be neutralized by someone half his weight was reshaping his understanding of power in ways that would take weeks to process. Tyler launched his second attack with a roar of frustration, throwing a combination of punches that he had seen professional fighters use in televised matches. His form was better than before, his technique more sophisticated, but to Emma's trained eye, he might as well have been moving in slow motion. She could see each punch coming long before he threw it, read the sequence of his combination in the way his shoulders shifted and his feet repositioned. Master Chen had made her practice against multiple attackers for hours at a time, honing her ability to process and respond to complex patterns of aggression until it became as natural as walking. This time, Emma didn't simply evade. As Tyler's left jab extended toward her face, she deflected it with a gentle upward motion of her right forearm, redirecting his force without opposing it directly. The punch sailed harmlessly over her shoulder, while Tyler's overcommitment pulled him forward into her waiting left hand. Her palm found his chest with the same surgical precision she had used on his friends. But this strike was different. Instead of the devastating impact that had felled Jake and Brad, Emma delivered just enough force to stop Tyler's forward momentum and send him stumbling backward. The message was clear without being cruel. She could hurt him whenever she chose, but she was choosing restraint. Tyler felt the controlled power behind that gentle push and understood on a visceral level that Emma was playing by entirely different rules than he was. She wasn't fighting him so much as she was demonstrating the vast gulf between their respective abilities. It was the kind of lesson that professional instructors gave to overconfident students. a humbling reminder of how much they still had to learn. The hallway had filled with even more students, as word of the confrontation spread through the school like wildfire. Upper and underclassmen alike pressed closer to get a better view, their phones held high to capture footage that would undoubtedly be shared across every social media platform within minutes. Emma could see teachers beginning to push through the crowd, drawn by the commotion and the obvious violation of school policy that was unfolding in their hallways. Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, whose classroom was closest to the confrontation, was the first to break through the ring of students. Her face carried the expression of someone who had dealt with countless teenage disputes over her 30-year career, but even she paused when she saw the scene before her. Jake and Brad were clearly injured, though not severely, while Tyler stood in a defensive crouch, facing a girl who looked like she had just stepped out of a library study session. The disconnect between what she was seeing and what she expected to see was profound enough to give her pause. "What is going on here?" Mrs. Patterson demanded, her voice carrying the authority that came from 3 decades of classroom management. "Mr. Matthews, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Chen, explain yourselves immediately." She looked between the 3 boys and Emma, trying to piece together a narrative that made sense from the physical evidence before her. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air as he struggled to find words that would explain his situation without admitting to the complete failure of his aggression. How could he tell his teacher that he had tried to humiliate the new girl and ended up being systematically dismantled by someone who looked like she weighed 90 pounds soaking wet? How could he explain that his 2 most reliable enforcers had been neutralized with moves so quick and efficient that he still wasn't entirely sure what had happened to them? Emma spoke before Tyler could formulate a response, her voice calm and respectful in the way that adults always appreciated from teenagers. "There was a misunderstanding, Mrs. Patterson. Tyler thought it would be funny to lift my skirt in front of everyone. I asked him to stop, and things escalated from there." Her explanation was simple and factual, containing no embellishment or emotional appeals, just a clear statement of cause and effect. The teacher's expression shifted as she processed Emma's words, her eyes moving from the girl's composed face to Tyler's flushed and disheveled appearance. She had taught Tyler for 2 years and was familiar with his tendency toward inappropriate behavior, though this was the first time she had heard of him attempting anything quite so blatantly offensive. The fact that his friends were clearly the worse for wear in this confrontation suggested that perhaps Tyler had finally picked the wrong target for his harassment. "Is this true, Mr. Matthews?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice taking on the stern tone that had cowed generations of misbehaving students. "Did you attempt to inappropriately touch this young lady?" The question hung in the air like a sword, carrying with it the weight of potential consequences that could follow Tyler for the rest of his academic career. Tyler's face went through several shades of red as he realized the trap that Emma's honesty had created for him. If he denied her version of events, she might elaborate on exactly how the confrontation had unfolded, potentially revealing the full extent of his humiliation to a faculty member who would be obligated to report it to the administration. If he admitted to the attempted assault, he would face immediate disciplinary action that could jeopardize his position on the football team and his prospects for college recruitment. "It wasn't like that," Tyler stammered, his voice lacking any conviction. "We were just playing around. She's new, so we were just trying to welcome her to Westfield." His explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears, the kind of transparent lie that adults had been hearing from guilty teenagers since the beginning of time. Emma's slight smile contained no malice, but Tyler recognized it as the expression of someone who held all the cards in a game he was losing badly. She had given him an opportunity to walk away with some dignity intact, and he had chosen to escalate the situation beyond all reason. Now she was simply allowing him to experience the natural consequences of his choices, standing back while he dug himself deeper into a hole of his own making. The approaching footsteps of additional faculty members echoed through the hallway, as the situation continued to draw official attention that Tyler desperately wanted to avoid. Principal Davis emerged from the crowd of students with the measured stride of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. His tall frame and graying temples gave him an air of authority that immediately commanded respect from even the most rebellious students. Behind him walked Coach Martinez, the school's physical education instructor, whose reputation for fairness and no-nonsense discipline made him one of the few faculty members that athletes genuinely respected, rather than simply feared. "Mrs. Patterson, what seems to be the problem here?" Principal Davis asked, his keen eyes already taking in the scene before him. He noted Jake's labored breathing, Brad's continued struggles to stand upright, Tyler's defensive posture, and most intriguingly, Emma's complete composure despite being at the apparent center of whatever altercation had taken place. He's 25. Years in education had taught him to read body language like a roadmap, and the story being told by the physical evidence was already raising questions about the official version he expected to receive. Coach Martinez moved directly to Jake and Brad, his trained eye immediately recognizing signs of physical distress that went beyond simple embarrassment. "Wilson, Chen, are you boys injured?" he asked, crouching down to examine Brad more closely. "Do we need to call the nurse?" The concern in his voice was genuine, though Emma could see him cataloging details that didn't quite fit the narrative he had probably been expecting to find. Tyler seized the opportunity to regain some control over the situation, straightening his shoulders and adopting the confident demeanor that had served him well in previous encounters with authority figures. "Coach, Principal Davis, there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice carrying what he hoped was the right mixture of contrition and injured innocence. "The new girl here completely overreacted to what was obviously just a harmless joke between students." Emma watched Tyler's performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. She had seen this exact script played out dozens of times across multiple schools. The way popular students could reframe their aggression as harmless fun while painting their victims as oversensitive troublemakers. The strategy worked because adults wanted to believe that their star athletes were fundamentally good kids who occasionally made poor choices, rather than systematic predators who had learned to exploit institutional blind spots. What exactly was the nature of this joke? "Mr. Matthews?" Principal Davis inquired, his tone carefully neutral. He had dealt with Tyler's disciplinary issues before, though they had always been relatively minor infractions that could be handled with detentions and stern warnings. The severity of the physical aftermath he was witnessing suggested that this incident had crossed into entirely different territory. Before Tyler could respond, Emma stepped forward with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the confrontation. "Principal Davis, Tyler attempted to lift my skirt in front of approximately 30 students, while his friends blocked my ability to move away from him. When I asked him to stop, he became aggressive, and his companions attempted to physically restrain me. I defended myself using minimal necessary force." Her statement was delivered in the clear, factual tone of someone providing testimony, each word chosen with precision to convey maximum information while avoiding inflammatory language. The effect of Emma's explanation on the gathered adults was immediate and profound. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted from confusion to outrage as the implications of what she was hearing sank in. Coach Martinez's jaw tightened visibly as he processed the description of what amounted to sexual assault, followed by attempted intimidation. Principal Davis's face remained carefully controlled, but Emma could see the storm building behind his professional composure. "That's not what happened at all," Tyler protested, his voice rising to a pitch that betrayed his desperation. "She's completely exaggerating everything. We barely touched her, and then she went crazy and attacked my friends for no reason." He gestured toward Jake and Brad as evidence of Emma's alleged overreaction, apparently unaware that their continued physical distress was undermining rather than supporting his version of events. Jake finally managed to straighten up enough to participate in the conversation, though his voice was still strained from the lingering effects of Emma's palm strike. "Yeah, she just went berserk," he wheezed, supporting Tyler's narrative with the automatic loyalty that had defined their friendship for years. "We were just kidding around, and she turned it into some kind of martial arts demonstration." The mention of martial arts caught Coach Martinez's attention immediately. His own background included extensive training in wrestling and basic self-defense, giving him enough knowledge to recognize the signs of formal combat instruction. He studied Emma more carefully, noting details that he had initially overlooked: her balanced stance, the controlled way she held her hands, the alert but relaxed posture that suggested someone comfortable with physical confrontation. "Miss Rodriguez, do you have training in martial arts?" Coach Martinez asked directly, his question cutting through Tyler's continued protests about his innocence. The inquiry wasn't accusatory, but rather carried the professional curiosity of one practitioner, recognizing another. Emma met his gaze steadily, recognizing that this moment would determine how the rest of the situation unfolded. She could continue to minimize her abilities and hope that the adults would focus on Tyler's inappropriate behavior. Or she could be honest about her background and face whatever consequences that honesty might bring. The promise she had made to her mother weighed heavily on her mind, but the lies and deception felt increasingly unsustainable. "Yes, sir," Emma replied simply. "I've been training in Krav Maga and kickboxing for 4 years." The admission hung in the air like a confession, transforming the entire dynamic of the conversation. Suddenly, she was no longer just a victim defending herself, but a trained fighter who had used her skills against untrained opponents. Tyler's face lit up with vindictive satisfaction as he seized on what he perceived as Emma's damaging admission. "See, she's basically a professional fighter. We're just normal students, and she attacked us with some kind of military fighting technique. That's assault with a deadly weapon or something, right?" His legal analysis was wildly inaccurate, but he delivered it with the confidence of someone who believed that technicalities might save him from the consequences of his actions. Principal Davis raised his hand to silence Tyler's rambling, his expression thoughtful as he processed this new information. "Miss Rodriguez, given your training, would you say that you used appropriate force in defending yourself?" The question was carefully phrased, designed to give Emma an opportunity to explain her actions without admitting to excessive violence. Emma appreciated the principal's diplomatic approach, but she had committed herself to honesty and wouldn't retreat from it. "Now, I used the minimum force necessary to stop their aggressive behavior," she said clearly. "My training emphasizes de-escalation and proportional response. Mr. Wilson and Mr. Chen will be uncomfortable for a few hours, but they haven't sustained any injuries that require medical attention." Coach Martinez nodded approvingly at Emma's assessment, his own experience confirming that her evaluation of the boys' conditions was accurate. Jake and Brad were clearly shaken and sore, but they were mobile and alert, showing none of the signs of serious trauma that would necessitate emergency intervention. The precision required to incapacitate 2 larger opponents without causing lasting harm spoke to a level of training and control that impressed him professionally. "That's completely unfair," Tyler burst out, his frustration finally overriding. his attempts at damage control. She has all these special skills, and we're supposed to just let her beat us up because she doesn't like jokes? His sense of injustice was genuine, rooted in a lifetime of believing that his social status protected him from meaningful consequences for his behavior. Mrs. Patterson spoke for the first time since the administrators had arrived. Her voice, carrying decades of accumulated anger at witnessing similar scenes play out in school hallways. Mr. Matthews, attempting to lift a female student's skirt is not a joke. It's sexual harassment, and in many jurisdictions, it would be classified as sexual assault. The fact that Miss Rodriguez was able to protect herself doesn't make your behavior any less reprehensible. The teacher's blunt assessment cut through Tyler's attempts to reframe the situation, stripping away the euphemisms and social cover that he had relied on to justify his actions. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed to grasp that the adults weren't going to treat this as a simple schoolyard dispute that could be resolved with mutual apologies and handshakes. Coach Martinez stood up from his examination of Brad, his assessment complete. "Both boys will be fine," he announced. "Some bruising, possibly some soreness for a day or two, but nothing that requires medical intervention." He turned to Emma with an expression of professional respect. "That was very controlled work, Miss Rodriguez. Your instructor taught you well." The coach's approval seemed to shift the entire atmosphere of the conversation. Instead of being viewed as an aggressor who had used excessive force against helpless victims, Emma was beginning to be seen as a skilled defender who had handled a dangerous situation with remarkable restraint. Tyler's narrative of innocent fun gone wrong was crumbling under the weight of adult scrutiny and professional assessment. Principal Davis pulled out his phone to check the time, clearly preparing to transition from crisis management to formal disciplinary procedures. "I think we need to continue this conversation in my office," he announced. "Mr. Matthews, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Chen, Miss Rodriguez, please accompany me immediately. Mrs. Patterson, Coach Martinez, I'll need written statements from both of you regarding what you observed." As the group began moving toward the administrative offices, Emma caught sight of Sophia Kim standing at the edge of the dispersing crowd. The petite Asian girl had been watching the entire confrontation with wide eyes, her expression mixing, all with something that looked like hope. Emma had noticed Sophia before, had seen the way she flinched when Tyler's crew passed in the hallways, had observed the careful way she navigated around the school's social predators. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Emma saw recognition pass between them. Sophia understood exactly what had just happened and what it meant for every student at Westfield High who had ever felt powerless in the face of systematic intimidation. The quiet girl from Portland had just proven that the bullies weren't invincible, that their reign of terror could be challenged and defeated. That recognition would prove to be more important than any disciplinary action Principal Davis might impose. The administrative office felt smaller than usual, with 6 people crowded into the space normally reserved for one-on-one conferences. Principal Davis settled behind his desk while Coach Martinez took the chair beside it, their positioning creating an informal tribunal that made Tyler shift uncomfortably in his seat. Emma sat with perfect posture, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while Jake and Brad slumped in their chairs like deflated balloons. "Before we begin," Principal Davis announced, pulling out a digital recorder, "I want everyone to understand that this conversation is being documented. Given the serious nature of the allegations, everything said here may be used in formal disciplinary proceedings." The principal's tone was grave, carrying none of the casual familiarity he usually displayed when dealing with minor infractions. Tyler's father would need to be contacted, Emma realized, watching the boy's face drain of color as the implications hit him. Richard Matthews owned the largest car dealership in Cedar Falls and served on the school board, wielding the kind of influence that had previously insulated his son from meaningful consequences. But sexual harassment allegations couldn't be swept away with donations to the athletics program or threats to withdraw financial support. Mr. Matthews, I'm going to give you one opportunity to provide a complete and honest account of what occurred, Principal Davis continued. I strongly advise you to choose your words carefully. The warning was delivered with the kind of paternal sternness that suggested genuine concern for Tyler's future, rather than mere institutional protocol. Tyler's story emerged in halting fragments, a sanitized version that painted him as a victim of Emma's overreaction to harmless teenage behavior. He described his actions as playful teasing that had been misinterpreted by someone unfamiliar with Westfield's social dynamics. His friends nodded along with practiced synchronization, their loyalty unwavering despite the physical evidence contradicting their narrative. Emma listened with the patience of someone who had heard similar justifications countless times before. She understood the psychology behind Tyler's self-deception, the way perpetrators convinced themselves that their victims' distress was unreasonable rather than acknowledging the harm they had caused. Master Chen had taught her that true strength included the wisdom to recognize when someone was beyond redemption and when they might still be salvaged through consequences and education. When Tyler finished his rambling explanation, Principal Davis turned to Emma with an expression of professional curiosity. Miss Rodriguez, would you please share your perspective on these events? His phrasing was careful, designed to elicit truth without leading the witness toward any particular conclusion. Emma's account was crisp and detailed, delivered with the clinical precision of someone trained to observe and remember under stress. She described Tyler's initial grab, the positioning of his friends to prevent her escape, and her escalating requests for him to release her. Her explanation of the physical confrontation was particularly thorough, outlining each defensive technique she had employed and the reasoning behind her tactical choices. You mentioned 4 years of martial arts training, Coach Martinez interjected. Can you tell us more about your background? His question carried professional interest rather than suspicion, the curiosity of one practitioner seeking to understand another's journey. Emma described her training at Master Chen's academy, the disciplinary philosophy that emphasized protection over aggression, and the countless hours spent learning to calibrate force levels for different threat scenarios. She explained how her instructor had drilled into his students the legal and ethical responsibilities that came with combat skills, the obligation to use their abilities only when absolutely necessary and never beyond what a situation required. The contrast between Emma's measured professionalism and Tyler's defensive rambling was stark enough that even Jake and Brad began to recognize how poorly their friend was representing himself. Tyler's repeated interruptions and attempts to reframe obvious lies as alternative perspectives only deepened the hole he was digging for himself. Principal Davis consulted his notes before delivering what everyone in the room recognized as his preliminary judgment. Mr. Matthews, based on the accounts I've heard and the physical evidence I've observed, I'm suspending you from school pending a formal investigation. You'll also be removed from the football team immediately, and your college recruitment activities are suspended until this matter is resolved. The pronouncement hit Tyler like a physical blow, destroying in moments everything he had built his identity around. Without football, he was just another mediocre student at a small-town high school, facing a future that suddenly looked much less certain than it had that morning. His friends would face similar but less severe consequences, their roles as accessories, rather than primary instigators, earning them shorter suspensions and mandatory counseling sessions. Emma received no disciplinary action whatsoever, Principal Davis commended her restraint in what he characterized as a legitimate self-defense situation, and Coach Martinez extended an invitation for her to visit the school's martial arts club when she felt ready to share her knowledge with interested students. As the meeting concluded and the participants filed out of the office, Emma found herself walking beside Sophia Kim in the hallway. The smaller girl had been waiting outside the administrative suite, clearly hoping for an opportunity to speak with her. "That was incredible," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and residual adrenaline. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Tyler like that. He's been making my life miserable since freshman year, and I always thought there was nothing anyone could do about it." Emma studied Sophia's face, recognizing the hope and fear warring in her expression. "There's always something you can do," she replied gently. "It just takes knowing what your options are and having the courage to use them." The conversation that followed would plant seeds that would grow into something much larger than either girl could imagine at that moment. News of the confrontation spread through Westfield High like wildfire, transforming Emma overnight from an invisible transfer student into something approaching a legend. Students who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to know everything about her background, her training, and most importantly, whether she might be willing to teach others what she knew. Tyler's suspension created a power vacuum that several other would-be bullies attempted to fill, but Emma's reputation preceded her now. The hallways felt different, charged with a new energy that came from the knowledge that predators were no longer guaranteed easy prey. Students walked with straighter spines, made eye contact more readily, and spoke up when they witnessed inappropriate behavior. Emma's mother received a call from Principal Davis that evening, a conversation that lasted over an hour and covered everything from Emma's exemplary conduct to her potential future at Westfield High. When Maria hung up the phone, she found her daughter waiting in the kitchen with an expression of quiet determination that she recognized from their most important conversations. "Misha," Maria said softly, "it sounds like you've had quite a day." The understatement was delivered with the kind of gentle humor that acknowledged the magnitude of what had occurred, while maintaining the emotional space for honest discussion. Emma nodded, meeting her mother's eyes with the confidence of someone who had finally stopped apologizing for being exactly who she was meant to be. "I kept my promise as long as I could, Mom. But some promises become impossible to keep when keeping them means letting other people get hurt." The conversation that followed would reshape both of their lives, opening doors that Emma had thought were permanently closed and setting in motion events that would transform not just Westfield High, but the entire community of Cedar Falls. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.